Dr. Sarkissian was born in the San Fernando Valley and raised in Panorama City, experiences that ground his practice in community, humility, and service. He completed his undergraduate studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, graduating with honors, and went on to earn his MD from the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine. He then trained in internal medicine at the Los Angeles County and USC Medical Center, an intense safety net environment where his interest in hematology and oncology deepened through caring for patients with complex malignancies. Pursuing that calling, he completed fellowship training at the University of California, Irvine and achieved board certification in internal medicine, hematology, and oncology. While his research spans multiple tumor types, his current clinical focus is breast cancer, where it emphasizes evidence-based, multidisciplinary care tailored to each patient's goals and biology. His guiding philosophy is that every patient and clinical scenario is unique, and that patients themselves teach us the essence of medicine, shaping the empathy, judgment, and precision required for excellent care. Please welcome Dr. Sarkisian.
Thank you for that intro. And I think somewhere along the way, it didn't mention that I actually went to Valley College initially, Los Angeles Valley College, and then I transferred to UCLA. So I have plenty of JC experience.
The first question is tell us what you do every day as a doctor. Like, how does your day or your weeks go?
Yeah, even I didn't really realize what that was until I was kind of really deep into residency and the fellowship because, a lot of, medical school, it's extremely busy as far as class and didactics and what they call OSCEs, which are, small simulations where you interact with actual real patients or actors, and then the actual rotations. So you don't actually get into full physician mode until you have a lot of autonomy and fellowship, and then, your real practice as an attending after you finish training and you're licensed and board certified and practicing. But on a day-to-day basis, I am a full-time clinician, so I see anywhere from 20 to 40 patients a day, depending on if I have help from an advanced practice practitioner. And I see patients. I get to clinic. Patients are lined up. It's either new patients or follow-up patients. I do hematology oncology exclusively, so it's either a blood-based disorder or some form of cancer that I'm seeing. And generally, what that means for me in my specialty, it's almost always done in the clinic. I would say maybe barely 10% of my patient load is going to be in the hospital seeing patients. It's essentially examining laboratory studies. If it's a blood-based disorder, perhaps a patient has anemia, meaning they have a lower than average hemoglobin. I have to determine what the reasons are and then come up with a plan. And it's generally, say, for example, oral iron or IV iron that we administer in our infusion center. What I do as a specialty, there's not very many procedures compared to other specialties. So, for example, if you're an orthopedic surgeon, you're spending days per week in the operating room. Same with neurosurgery. While chemotherapy is part and parcel of what we do as an oncologist, it's not physically a procedure we do ourselves. It's generally done by certified nurses in an infusion center. Some oncologists may be involved and do bone marrow. Okay.
You're muted. You're still muted, Dr. Sark. Yep.
How about now? Yeah.
Yep, we could hear you. Yep.
Perfect. So a lot of what I do with seeing patients involves a lot of analyzing blood-based disorders. And when it comes to cancers, one confirming that it has cancer and coming with a treatment plan, so generally for cancer that requires surgery. It involves radiation therapy. So I would have them to a radiation oncologist. And me, as a medical oncologist, I administer chemotherapy or hormonal therapy, even as a pill or an IV. So I tend to monitor efficacy based off scans and, importantly, side effect profiles.
The other thing is people want to know is how do you deal with loss, like patients that you lose, and how do you cope with that? Because I'm sure, cancer sucks in many ways, and you have a lot of wins, but there's some losses as well. And people want to know just how do you deal with that?
Sadly, we don't. I wish I can, come up with sort of an articulate way of describing how we deal with it. But one reality of being an oncologist is that it's a very real profession. You are interacting with people in situations that will statistically be common for most people and families. So, God forbid it's a family member of your own, or someone in your first or second degree relatives, you will be coming across it as a sad reality. And, we tend to come up with coping mechanisms. Perhaps we get busy with our own personal lives, or we have to move on and see the next patient. But, I can't really think of a situation in which, a week or two doesn't go by and I'm reflecting on past events or things that I'm dealing with. Um, it really is not very different from the stereotype that people imagine, sadly. And you'll find ways, I think I would say the biggest way we handle it is just simply by the virtue of the fact that we are busy seeing so many patients. So at some point you do have to, move on and start taking care of other patients. And I think what ends up realistically happening is you are preoccupied with other things that come up. And, some of your other cases are, happier in some ways or maybe less intense. So they perhaps crowd out, your central vision. But I think those, you know, the emotional toll is real. But we tend to look at it a little bit differently. I think if you're going about, sort of a day-to-day life and your things are working very well, and all of a sudden you come across a cancer case, you're like, well, that was a massive interruption in my happy streak or my non-cancer streak. Another way you can start to think about it is, well, you know, cancer is sort of a natural default for cells anyway, because they want to have a growth mechanism rather than a death mechanism. And actually, cells have come up with homeostasis mechanisms and apoptotic mechanisms, plus immunologic layers. There's a lot of reasons as to why cells sort of grow and then come to a halt or find ways to dampen that cell. So I guess one way we tend to look at it is, good God, there's actually cancer brewing all around everywhere, sadly. And we're fortunate enough to be in situations where we're sort of cancer free. It might be sort of a twist on perspective, but I find that to be one mechanism I use to sort of get by.
Now, someone asked, how or were there any issues that you experienced or being a transfer student from a community college to UCLA and ended up becoming a physician? Were there any problems you experienced, whether those were expected or unexpected?
I don't think during the transfer process itself, it did. I ended up being at JC for 4 years because I changed my major when I came in. I thought I wanted to major in history, and I was a little bit more oriented in that direction. And, I was obviously working a job like a lot of people at community college. And I didn't, and then I ended up getting a job in a pharmacy, and that sort of sparked my interest in pharmacology. And then from there, I sort of pivoted into the physical sciences. I really ended up enjoying math and chemistry, physics, and biology was actually surprisingly a later add-on on my interest level, and it was a little bit of a mental pivot. And just along the way, at first I thought I wanted to do pharmacy school, but after working in a pharmacy for so long, I really ended up choosing medicine. So I was there. I took every class you can imagine. I took, you know, obviously calculus one, two, three. I took linear algebra, differential equations. There was even this like 1 unit, like higher order abstract math class I took with the department head. I took all the calculus based physics. I took, full year of general chem, OChem. They even offered biochem. I took it. I essentially gobbled up everything they could offer, and I took it. I wanted to be as ready as possible, and it worked out pretty well. I was able to get into Berkeley, LA, and San Diego that I applied to out of the UC systems and a couple of Cal States I applied to. I got a little overly ambitious. I tried to apply to Caltech and I had to take transfer exams, and they were pretty difficult. I think unless, if you want to go to Caltech or MIT, I think back then the odds of transferring were about 10%. And I think it's a little hard because in order to do well on those tests, obviously you have to be smart enough, but you do have to take classes that train you the way they train you over there. And the way they solve problems was a little bit different than obviously how we did it at a JC. But again, my attitude back then was, aim for the stars and land on the moon. And I've always carried that approach. When I transferred, I don't think academically I had any issues. I really enjoyed the major I picked, which was chemistry. So I jumped right into the upper div classes, and it was nice to be around a small, focused, passionate group of people. Now going on to medical school, I do think the JC transfer did make it a little bit challenging. We can't prove it, but I think there's enough statistics out there that show that some schools are prejudiced toward kids that have transferred. But like anything else, I think for students that do transfer from a JC to a 4-year, if they do feel perhaps intimidated or they feel like, be more emotional or stressful situation, you just take every opportunity you can to make yourself as competitive an applicant as possible. And I always told myself, I'm transferring from a JC, the odds are stacked against me. So what else can I do to strengthen my application? I think when I was at community college, I tutored in the math lab. I was a chemistry tutor for the department. I corrected physics homework for the physics department. I volunteered at a high school with developmental. I would probably just carry that attitude with you probably until the day you die. And I think sort of maintaining that constant hustle attitude just makes you back what it is you're trying to do because it makes you very present in what you do. Just like going through, and I think that's always going to stand out when people meet you, and it stands out when you interview people for doing that. It's always going to come out in your writing. It's going to come out in your sort of mannerisms, and I think that's really the backbone to developing any sort of passion in anything you do. So, but coming back to the initial questions, I don't want to digress too much.
Alrighty. So, I was wondering, so you mentioned before about how you went from a community college or a JC to a 4-year institution, UCLA, and I know that UCLA operates under the quarter system. I was wondering, do you think the quarter system helped you prepare? Because I know it's a very fast-paced system. Do you think that helped you prepare a little bit for the workload of medical school, or do you think the semester, like, would you say that a semester system or quarter system, because I assume, went through both, helped you most with preparing for medical school, or was
I
it not?
tend to I would say the quarter system maybe helped to some extent, but just by raw volume, when you get to medical school, even as busy as you are as an undergrad, you're easily dealing with about, 2.5 to 3.5x the volume when you get to medical school. It does take a few months to just adjust to the lifestyle. I mean, when you're taking a college class, even upper div, there's a pretty good chance you can really sort of master the material. Probably not at the level of the professor because they've been doing it for 2 decades more than you have. But in medical school, it's just impossible to sort of own all the material because there's so many more layers of depth that you can get into that you just physically don't have time for. So it's almost like, you go in and you try to get as much work done as possible and try to be as efficient as possible. And when you get to medical school, they'll say there's high yield and low yield information. Because if you start getting into first, second, third, fourth tier layers of depth, you'll just never have time to sort of get a 30,000-foot view of the information. So, but I do think going back to the original question, the quarter system probably did help. I do enjoy the quarter system because especially for upper division classes, you really don't need an entire semester to cover the information. And the quarter system allows you to get really focused and subspecialized with sort of an information niche or a class, sort of build that momentum, kind of, master it to what's expected at your level, and then move on to the next.
For the next question regarding research, what makes a student research question too big versus realistic for an undergraduate student?
What is the question? So what makes a research question too big?
Yeah, like how broad versus, what if it's asking for too much? What makes it possible for, what is possible for an undergraduate student, would you say, yes, in regarding research?
You mean when you approach a PI about doing a project,
I
or
think it's also just the span of whether or not it's realistic to do a multi-year, study, like what is required. Like, would you say that, like, what is required, I guess, to do a research project and to narrow down on your research question? I guess if you could speak on that.
well, I think, one, finding research projects is hard enough, so beggars can't be choosers. We actually did a study in the Armenian American Medical Society's research program that I head up. So we actually had a few undergraduates just document every single professor they emailed and contacted to see what the actual success rates were. And they found that you really have to email about somewhere on the order of 6 to 10 dozen people at a UC to successfully land a position in a lab. So if you're just emailing like 10 or 15 and you'll probably get no by raw numbers because they have so many kids emailing them. So that's your first step, just getting in somewhere. Second, you don't know how important you are to them, how busy they are. There's no way to know unless you sort of get there, see if you fit in. Are they at a point in their careers where they're actually doing projects, and will they give you sort of an independent piece that you can sort of take on? But I would budget at least 2 years out to get a feel for, one, you're going to put feelers out there. Second, by the time you land yourself an interview, a starting position, is it something in a lab or is it a clinical laboratory? It took me 6 months to get into a cardiology research position. Um, and and then from there, that sort of segued into another project that I did. It took me a while to get a lab job. Easy, I would budget 2 years and always keep your eye out for opportunities. So does that help answer the question? And then once you're there, you really have to sort of start building a relationship with the PI. And it's hard. You're busy. You're doing classes. Obviously, your grades are very important. Maybe you don't really have the time to devote to that, PI's subspecialist interests. And, there has to be some chemistry there. Is there a postdoc or a graduate student that's willing to take you on? In some ways, there is some element of luck. The stars kind of have to align for you to get the publications you want, or maybe a first authorship, as which they call the Holy Grail. But like anything else, you just have to kind of put yourself out there, be open-minded, be a little bit of an opportunist, and that's not meant to be, you know, it doesn't have the best connotation sometimes when they say opportunist, but you do have to be an opportunist because you don't know when an opportunity shows up because they are not a dime a dozen. And apparently, and now a lot of the undergraduates I've spoken to, because of the cuts in federal funding, it's become exceedingly harder. So in some ways, you take what you can get and build on it.
Thank you. So for the next question, someone asks, is it better for a beginner to join an existing project or to try to start their own research question from scratch?
No, join an existing project because at the end of the day, you are working with a group of people. There's a hierarchy. They really have ownership of the content, the expertise. So learn from them. I think it's very hard unless you have really, really done a lot of research on your own and you know exactly what you're talking about and you know how to do research. You can't really just walk in and have your own idea and then they're going to give you lab space and equipment and trust you. It just doesn't really work that way. Now, if it's sort of in the social sciences, even then you would really have to know how to properly formulate a research question and come up with a protocol. And and I think for kids that have already kind of figured that out, I mean, they have paid their dues. They've spent time reading and writing and analyzing. It's not like they just sat there for 2 hours and figured something out. I mean, they've definitely put in the time because doing research is a skill set. It can seem like a checkbox or sort of a resume filler, But on the back end, like anything else, it is a skill set, being able to read material, critically analyze it, be curious about it, and then learn to do a spin on it, ask a question. And importantly, it's one thing to ask the cool question, but to develop a protocol on how to answer it specifically in a scientific fashion, collect the data, analyze it, write it up, you know.
Thank you. So someone asked, how do you decide what research project or topics are worth pursuing, especially with cancer research being such a large field of study?
Everything in research is subspecialized. So for example, cancer is broken down into what we call, liquid and solid tumors, meaning the blood cancers, lymph node cancers, and tissue-based cancers. So let's just say we're talking about tissue-based cancers. Well, there's colon cancer and there's lung cancer, there's gastric cancer. And then we look at lung cancer. We're getting subspecialized, right? Lung cancer is broken down into a lot of molecular drivers. There's at least about 10 of them. So within that, ALK is one of them, ALK, anaplastic lymphoma kinase. So within ALK, we have first, second, and third generation ALK inhibitors. So somebody could be looking at novel ALK inhibitors. Are they covalently binding? Are they non-covalently binding? Is there maybe an allosteric inhibition of the protein? Are there resistance mechanisms you can try and target? And then you start getting into like the medicinal chemistry, the adverse event profile. So it ends up being a branch of a branch of a branch of a branch. And most of the time, and I would say one trick, if you do approach a researcher about doing a project, make sure you know exactly what that niche is they're in. And that takes time and effort. You're going to have to do that see if it's something that interests you, and try to know what you're talking about in that small niche. And you're not going to figure that out by doing 10 minutes of reading right before the interview with the PI. You really have to do your homework in at least a few hours, and just let that mental momentum build. So, but like I mentioned, a lot of research projects are hyper specialized, and always think a branch of a branch of a branch. If they do give you a project in that niche, just read a lot about what is going on in that little niche, and you take it from there.
Yeah, and research is not like Googling stuff and coming up with like it's like a protocol, and if you're starting out, you don't have the skills, knowledge, or even the ability to do it. And you have to, it's kind of like an apprenticeship model. It's like you got to like work under someone and kind of learn the process, and they have to trust you with with it as well. I mean, they have, grant money and they're not going to let you mess with their data until they could trust you. And so it built up on it. And I think we've done a lot of programming and post a lot of information about summer programs where they actually have like dedicated time and funding to help students develop their research skills, and those are also competitive too. So you got to apply to a couple summer programs as well.
Yeah, and like everything else in life, know your audience. When I built the research program for the Armenian Medical Society, it was definitely a learning curve for me. And I think by the time I got to 80 or 90 students over the last couple of years, the outliers will always stick out, like when every teacher has a bad experience with a student. So most PIs are going to be cautious about who is this undergraduate knocking on my door that wants to do a project for me. As optimistic as they sound and as hardworking as they say they are, you don't really know who this person is. And with limited funding, limited time, maybe limited capacity to train you, they may think twice about who they take on board. Because it might seem like, I think one perspective people have is there's some sort of research project going on, and like, what can I do to get my name on a project? And it just doesn't kind of work that way. Like for example, if you walked into Target store, you know, if you just walk in and tell them I'm here to help, I mean, you're not really of any utility to sort of an operational organization. Um, Even, the cashier has a certain knowledge base and skill set, and they would have to stop what they're doing and teach you how to do something before you're useful to them. And research is not any different. You have a PI who's a PhD, they've done their postgraduate training, they've sacrificed a lot of their life for poor pay. Their entire salary and future is based off of begging for grants, especially the younger ones. And then comes along someone who feels perhaps entitled and has no promise of delivering quality work or even honesty. So you have to really look at it from the PI's perspective. What benefit are you going to be to my operation and my organization? Dr. Jabin, what do you think of that?
I'm not a doctor, but I'm a pre-med student myself. But no, I think like I work in the ER as a tech, and a lot of people show up the first day, and it's like it's a whole different world. And so, and I think anything you look at it, either from working in a lab to even working at Starbucks, like there's a protocol and a procedure, and the same thing has to do with research. I mean, I've done a research project in a summer program, and you have dedicated time, dedicated funding, dedicated things to do that. But most labs that take on undergrads don't have that, and so you kind of have to be malleable and work within that organization and entity, and you have to be, what is it, ready, willing, malleable, workable to do that. And so it's not um, nobody's going to show up the first day and say, "Oh, here's your research project," and come up with a question and go with it. The other part of it too, any kind of research that you do, it's not like you can't just sit there and say, "I'm going to do research." You got to go through IRB and all of these different like things that you're responsible. I mean, even like the first thing they make you do the first week you're in a lab, they make you go through all of these like modules that you got to like pass to understand like all the different things that you got to do. So it's not like some easy thing to say, "I'll just show up and we're gonna let you, I don't know, do something." It's a lot more involved.
Yeah, and you're talking about patient level research. A lot of the projects I do are not patient based because that way I don't have to go through an IRB. And even then, from my perspective, I've worked with a lot of students, and there is quite a range of motivation, talent, honesty. I've already seen quite a bit. So I tend to be a little bit more, and we have a pathway that I've built. So, for example, when a student says I'm interested in research, I actually make them do a 20-page book report equivalent for a 20 question book report equivalent, where I'm like, okay, so you're telling me you're interested in doing a project in, let's just say, lung cancer again. So I'll make them go and research, 20 very targeted questions on, say, EGFR driven lung cancer. And if they can send back to me a non-AI generated 5 to 6 page report, then I know that student is ready to take that information and build on it. But if they send me something, filled with AI answers or nothing at all, that's my weed out right there. And again, I'm not trying to be mean by any metric, but this is a volunteer thing I do. And it does take up a lot of my time. It's not part of my typical workflow, but the students do have to declare themselves and be ready to do independent, honest work.
Alrighty, thank you. For the next question, someone said,
I think he went off again. You got this. Oh, there
I'm
you
right
go.
here.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, I think the favorite thing was when I've seen a research project that I did is they test you out. They'd say go read these like 10 articles or 5 articles and come back. And the people that show up the next day or whatever they're supposed to, or the next journal club, are not prepared. It shows, and their opinion of that individual goes down, and they're just not going to put in their time and effort. And people are very selfish. Like, as much as they want to help students, like if you're not going to give back and be productive member of a team, just like a sports team, if you're or anything that you want to do, if that person's not contributing, you just not, and it's self-preservation, and we all have it, like, you know. But yeah,
No,
there's
and and most ventures out there are just easier and they pay better. The reality is, it's probably a lot easier to, go get a vocational degree and then just start working. Your skill set is very well defined. The market needs are very well defined, but research is generally very underpaid. It could be very complicated. It's mentally draining. You can go do a lot of jobs at 40 hours a week. You cannot do focused research at 40 hours a week. It's mentally draining and impossible. So it's exactly what you said. I really like that journal article example. Let's see what you can do in the next 24 hours. It's probably going to be a reflection of how they generally roll. And a lot of these PIs, they just don't have time.
Thank you very much. So for the next question, someone asks, as a CC student, I always
Oh,
find
I was going to
studying.
mention, I will add one more thing. It's not sort of any student's fault that they're like that. There generally has not been any institutional mechanism to say, hey, you know what? You showed up at UCLA as a transfer student or somebody from high school. Junior year, you're all forced to take this, learning how to do research class. And you have to produce results at the end of quarter one. And then after that, then you can go start knocking on every PI's door and tell them, look, I have the skill set, I'm ready to roll. There really isn't a mechanism for that. So sadly, a lot of kids are just left, to run around campus trying to you know, hop on this project or that project. A lot of the undergrads I've recently spoken to said there really isn't sort of Indeed jobs platform equivalent of like, hey, here's a list of PIs that need help on these projects on these days, kind of like the gig economy. I don't think anyone has developed something like that. So unless Matthew, something has changed that I don't know of.
Yeah, I think summer programs are great, great way to get in, and
Yeah,
one of the things also is research and medicine in general is that it's very small and everyone knows everyone, and if you're someone that's a hard worker and has a good impression on the team, they're more likely to recommend you, and they most likely know other people that will recommend you at other institutions. Um, but if you are not, they will, they will also make it known that you're flaky. Like I know that I was involved in a summer program, and then it was not in my home area. So then when I was leaving, they said, "Oh, this is so and so. You could contact them." And they could do that. Even like in my work, like I work in the ER as an ER tech, and I have residents and attendings coming up to me all the time and say, "Hey, there's this opportunity. Do you want to join?" And I actually like have to turn more things away than accept them just because there's only 168 hours in a week. So if you know that you're someone dependable and all of those things that we talked about,
yeah.
they're more likely to come looking for you instead of you looking out for them. And that's a good thing to have is to turn down opportunities because you can't do them.
Yeah. And so so they got to know you as an ER tech, correct? That's how they
Yeah, it's
initially got
it's
to know
bo-
you?
yeah, it's mostly the ER type, but also I was in a summer program that I was doing
Yep.
research, and in both of those areas, they always like come up with opportunities for me. And it's just like can't do it,
Yeah.
sorry.
See,
But
that's what's smarter.
if I really want to do something, I always say, hey, can you like help me make this connection or do this thing or that thing? And people are willing to go to bat for you as well.
Yeah. For example, just a few days ago, I did a gynecologic conference, and one of the people that RSVP'd, I had asked him, like, I can't find your name online. Where do you practice? And he said, oh, I'm just a volunteer. I'm a pre-med volunteer. I'm like, okay, so come on over to the conference. So he came. He met other physicians there, and I was pretty impressed by the fact that as a volunteer, he was willing to come to a conference on a Thursday night. I liked his attitude. I'm like, hey, you know what? If you want to come work with me on research projects, you're more than welcome, and now I'm waiting for him to reach out. But it's sort of, he was able to put himself in that right network and become known. And, as long as you sort of have a, likable personality, then you can start to build relationships. And, like we had, one young, bright kid join our nonprofit medical society just as a volunteer. And then he came to my clinic to shadow me, and he just kept on coming back. And I'm like, okay, well, this kid's really good. And then he was, I started to just randomly throw around ideas. Hey, here's a conference that I went to as a pre-med myself. Why don't I help you write up a case report, just to help him out? And then from there, over the course of 2 years, me and him, we pretty much, built a research program. and expanded the mentorship program for the Armenian Medical Society. And, if it wasn't for him constantly being present, available, and having good work ethic, but again, it really, really benefited him because he got to add so many things to his resume. I think he ended up with like 25 poster presentations, four papers. So, but anyway, not to digress, but really adds on to what you were saying. Next question.
Just really quick, I want to say at UCLA, at least for the psych department, I know that they started implementing a like a page where you can find a bunch of research opportunities within the department. So that I know exists, but only at UCLA as far as I'm aware. But for the next question, so as a CC student, I always find students being able to publish research. How can a student like me be able to even start research?
Well, one, you do have to pick something you enjoy. I mean, I'm assuming you're talking about at the campus level itself. One, you do have to find a PI who's even willing to support you because that requires, one, you have to aim at formalizing your research. Are you going to be submitting a paper to a journal or are you going to be presenting a poster at a conference? If a PI is not actively doing that and they are still willing to help you, you have to do all the legwork. You have to say, hey, you know what? There is a molecular biology conference in New Orleans next summer. If you let me work in your lab and on this project, I think I can get it done by this date and we can submit the abstract on this deadline and I'll take care of all the funding. But if they're not interested in any of that and they don't do it, they don't have anything to offer you. So you have to realize a PI has to offer you, importantly, their last name because they're the final author on the paper, a research mechanism or apparatus that you can join. It's almost like a court on which you can, play basketball, and be willing to guide you unless you're hyper autonomous. But usually at a JC, most of them are just there teaching. So if you do find a few that are doing that, and again, they're busy. So when you do approach them and they're willing to give you, yeah, I was mentioning, so when the opportunity presents itself, you have to be willing to just take it and run with it.
Alrighty. So this next question asks, so if I'm just starting research and don't know what topic to pick, how do you recommend I find or refine a good research question?
One, you'd have to find something you're interested in. I mean, you can't really bounce around from, you know, medicinal chemistry to organizational psychology. You do have to pick something. And, at first, I'm sure it can be hard if you're just the first or second year in college and you're just reading research articles and, the abstracts can seem complicated. And I wouldn't get discouraged. It has nothing to do with intelligence or anything. It's just they tend to work in a very particular space where the same buzzwords keep coming up, the same topics keep coming up, and they're generally sort of refinements on a very, particular niche. So, for example, if you didn't know anything about cars and you're all of a sudden start getting into debates about, what's the ideal displacement for a big block V8 if you're building like a drag racer or something, right? At first, you're like, well, what's 7.2 liter versus 5.7 liter? What's a camshaft? What's a supercharger? At first, these can all seem like foreign words. I gave the most simple example I could think of, but the more and more you read about the space, you realize, okay, they're really just talking about this small, small niche of information, and they're just talking about subtle, subtle variations on each, and they're not really going to deviate too much. So one, I do recommend picking a broad area that you like, and then just, there's no getting around reading. You do have to constantly read and read and read. And by the way, this is reading on your own time, not related to any class you're taking. Read and then get very curious and then challenge yourself, challenge the information, and think about ways in which you could potentially do something different than what's already done.
Can I just add also one thing too is, and this is not to be, and I hope people don't take this the wrong way. You're not going to show up the first day to a research lab or a research project and come up with a topic that you want to do. If it's kind of like saying I'm gonna show up and I'm gonna run the 100-meter Olympic finals, and I'm going to do it. Like, you got to like practice, you got to do those things to build up to it. So if you're going to show up to a lab, you're basically, first, the thing you have to do is say, okay, this person is doing this research and I'm interested in it. You go and find out the papers that they've published, you read through them, you find out what their interests are. Most of the people that have labs have these really cool things called websites and web pages. Look at that research, that they tell you what their research is. This is a lab research and what they're interested in, and understand that and show up and say, hey, um, and so know who you're getting into. That's kind of like doing your background and your research. Nobody's going to show up the first day and say, "Oh, give me your research proposal." They're not going to do that. They're too busy doing their own things, and you kind of have to be malleable to what they're doing. And so you see that. Hopefully, it's something that you're interested in, that you could strive in. But also, like, if this is the first time you're doing this, you don't really have a lot of choice. Like, the first project that I did was I had I'd had very, very limited interest. But I did it because it was going to be a great opportunity, and this person was. And so I got in there and I started doing it. And then I said, "Oh, I'm really interested in this thing." They're like, "Well, this is great. And we're going to start this new project that I was really interested in." So again, like, being like malleable and ready, like, make sure you know those identities. And today with the internet, you can get a lot of information about a lot of people before you even meet them. And so I think you
Yeah,
can do a lot of the background.
yeah, and that's absolutely right. I mean, it's not like you're just going to walk in and say, "Well, give me all your lab gear, and I'm going to start like doing my own project." It just doesn't work that way. I remember when I first started the research program, I hadn't really developed the oncology side of it, so we actually used to just have kids do small education-based research projects. I would say, well, you know what? You're around premeds. Why don't we go ask 30 or 40 of your premed friends at the library or your friends to answer a 7-question survey, let's just say about sleep habits. And a lot of kids laugh. They're like, oh, this is a bit silly or stupid. Isn't it below me? Shouldn't I be doing heart transplant research? And I'm like, why don't you just learn how to do this first before you go thinking about, putting a baboon heart in a human, and, thinking about acute or chronic rejection for these patients. So, and a lot of them actually learned a lot through that process. I would say, well, let's pick a niche. We're picking education. The next smaller niche is what? Pre-med education. And then within that, quality of life for pre-meds. And then one subset of that be sleep. It could be exercise. It could be stressors, whatever it is. So we decided to pick sleep as just one of the projects we did. So then we said, okay, sleep, we imagine or we hypothesize, is probably not perfect for a lot of pre-meds. That probably some things are off. So we decided to come up with 7 or 10 questions that this student went and asked a bunch of his friends, and online we had questions. I corrected them, I fine-tuned them. Then he launched the survey, and then he gathered the data. And then I said, okay, great. Now you gathered the data. Now you have to learn to analyze it. Some of them have never read an abstract. So then I want you to do subset analysis. He didn't know what that was. So we learned how to do that. And then afterwards, I'm like, okay, now we have to take it from what looks like 10th or 11th grade level writing to graduate level writing. And then came the actual abstract submission. I'm like, well, now you have to write it with the character limits of the conference you're going to. You also have to plan to go to the conference, meaning you have to travel and spend some money. And then comes the actual poster, and you do have to make a balanced poster. It has to be pretty. So something as simple as asking your friends about their sleep habits that are pre-meds has can be transformed into a quality higher order product. And then the next level is, oh, okay, so what can we do now that we realize there now comes the opportunity for intervention. Now you realize, 85,000 people or something take the MCAT every year. Half of them are probably not sleeping properly or stressed out. Maybe some of these kids are taking benzodiazepines or trazodone. Who knows what kind of mental health issues they have. And now you can start thinking about, wow, we learned that people just have terrible sleeping habits as they're prepping for the MCAT. This probably has long-term ramifications. It's maybe affecting our mental health. Now you can develop potential protocols to intervene on these. So one simple set of questions has now transformed into an entire arena of opportunity. Now, depending on where the student wants to take each of these, he can now end up with 5 abstracts. So does that help?
Yeah, definitely. So, two kind of more broad questions. So, someone asked about common mistakes you found when people design a project for the first time, as well as when trying to publish.
Well, I think I'll start with the second one first. There's publication and presentation. When you say publish, a lot, the first thing that comes to mind is a paper. You can either be a middle author or a first author. I think it's pretty hard for an undergraduate to be a first author. It's not expected. And if you do end up as a first author on a peer-reviewed publication, I mean, it's quite impressive, but it's also a lot of work. And you don't randomly just become that person. It is on the backdrop of you probably just genuinely reading a lot. You're probably a reader. You're probably curious. You're also probably daring enough to ask questions and formulate projects. And you would really stand out if you knocked on my door and said, "Hey, I've just been studying a lot on, HER2-driven breast cancer. I know all this stuff. I'm ready for a project." I mean, that's pretty different than someone just knocking on your door and saying, "Hey, like, can you give me something?" That's a different kind of student. So when you get someone like that, you're like, okay, you've done your research and you have some ideas, like you seem to know what you're talking about. Even then, they would have to prove themselves and take it to that level. So that would be a first author publication. Middle author, you kind of got lucky. You hopped on a project and you happened to get published in the time frame for your application. Posters are a lot simpler. There's a lot of conferences that go around. You just have to submit an abstract that's good quality and genuine, and you'll get approved, and then you go do a poster. I would say the amount of time it takes to write a paper that gets through the peer review process, oh, you're looking at probably 10 times the work of a single poster. It's a lot more work, and it's much more expensive on a PI because these submissions can cost thousands of dollars and they take a lot of time. It takes a lot of work and effort to not only write a paper, but to deliver a quality one that passes the peer review process. So, but again, those are sort of the later manifestations of what are the elements, what are the foundational blocks. One, reading. If you're not an independent, curious reader, you are just not going to do well in this. You have to genuinely enjoy reading and researching and learning and writing, and sort of taking that to the next level. I think if someone is just imagining there's this PI out there who has all these projects that need to be done, almost like shift work at Target, you're just going to show up and do all these and just crank out publications. It just doesn't work that way. There has to be some independent legwork involved. So, and what was the other part of your question? You had the question about the publications, and what was the other part?
And then also some common mistakes you've seen when people begin a project.
Common mistakes. Not asking questions. Like I remember recently there was, this third or fourth year who said, "Hey, I want to do another project with you." I'm like, "Okay." So I sat down with him for half an hour over the phone on a Saturday, obviously time away from my family. And we went through a couple of articles and I explained to him exactly what it is I want. And I gave him examples. And then I think a month later, he texts me, "What am I supposed to do again?" I'm like, "Well, I spent half an hour with you. Like, didn't you write any of this down?" He hadn't written anything down. So I told him, I'm like, "Well, okay." I explained it to him again. And then he sent me like, he essentially sent me an Excel sheet of nothing a couple of weeks afterwards. And I said, "Look, I don't have the time to help you with the baby steps. I sincerely apologize. But when you sort of are in a better place in your life or your pre-med career and you're more ready, then I'm willing to help you."
And those are not like hard those are very hard discussions to have. Nobody wants to do them, and don't like putting people in that position having to do it is just not like a it's it's also maturity to come and say, hey, you know what? I can't do this right now, or I have other things going on, or whatever reason is, like just be upfront with people and people understand things happen. Life is not linear. It's
Yeah.
but yeah, but taking somebody's time and it just it also like I think like bad karma, but that's just me.
Yeah. And like now with the new pathway I have where I make people answer 15 or 20 questions that are sort of a funnel aiming us in a particular direction. That's me just being very nice. Not a lot of PIs are going to do that because they have to generate, a series of questions that the student answers to help guide them. And again, I'm almost devising it like a class. But if you're just a busy PI and maybe you have like a postgraduate helping you, they're not going to develop a pathway for that. They're just going to expect you to like listen to them say 5 sentences and you write it down and you figure it out.
Alrighty, someone asks, regarding your personal career, when did you participate in research and when would you find it the most helpful? So undergraduate, medical school, and currently during once you become a physician.
So I remember at Valley College, there was nothing. It was really just other extracurriculars I did. And then when I got to UCLA, I applied for a lab job. So I luckily got it early on. From there, I was able to do basic paid work, and I did a side project on brain tumors with a guy named Dr. Lee. He ended up being, very influential for me, and I think I really appreciated his mentorship years later. And just a few comments here and there. He really went out of his way to criticize some of the decisions I had made and some of my other perspectives on things, and that ended up carrying quite a bit of weight. You know, that was one project. I volunteered at UCLA's hospital on Friday nights, and I remember I just met a cardiologist one time because I would try to talk with as many of the doctors as possible, and he was kind enough to pass on my name to his secretary, and she reached out to me, I think 4 or 6 months later, and then I was able to join his clinical research project. I was able to get my name on a few publications. I ended up presenting one orally in Carmel at AFMR. I think it was like 2006. And then from there, I was able to do some organ procurement with the cardiac transplant team. So it's sort of one thing led to another, but I did have this sort of eager beaver attitude, and I tried to take on as much as I could. And, sometimes a little overwhelming. So that was so I think I ended up with like some poster presentations there. And then in medical school, I was a little interested in surgery. So I worked with a plastic surgeon on a small project. I think I did a couple of case reports. And then when I started residency, there were a few more case reports I did. I did start a few projects for the GI doctor, but I wasn't able to finish them. And I think that was an important learning lesson for me. And then in fellowship, by that point, I just really enjoyed writing. So I tried to publish as many case reports as I could. I did a few review papers with, some of the attendings. And whatever conference there was, I tried to always get something submitted. So I think I ended up with like 12 or something by the end of fellowship. And, it doesn't really help me in my career directly, but I did bring a lot of those skills to, the Armenian American Medical Society, where I, do a lot of mentorship and research. And, for example, I am not a researcher at the level of MD Anderson or a top cancer center. It's not really part of my day description, but it's more than enough for helping a lot of these undergraduates just get started and published, write a first author, help them write a, peer-reviewed journal article. So, but it just takes a lot of, and, I used to read a lot. I mean, I have to read a little bit more focused now just because of how busy I am with my family and work. But, I remember even besides my undergraduate studies, I was very, very much into space history. I read a ton of astronaut biographies. I used to keep up with a lot of the, astronomy literature. So it was just sort of a side interest and passion for me. And I would just genuinely just read all the time. And I think if you kind of have to have that if you want to build, you know, reading, writing, you just have to like doing that to at least get, you know, some traction in the research part of your curriculum.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I would just add that like if you want to go into medicine, the one thing you do a lot is reading, and if that's not something you enjoy doing, it's going to be really challenging. Certainly, like learning new protocols, new and you got to be able to read, and you got to be able to enjoy it to do it, and it's and you got to you become good at it, but you have to do a lot. It's like the whole 10,000 hour rule.
Yeah.
So someone asked really quick, could you just repeat, how many did you say was the average number of cold emails to get into a lab at a UC?
Oh, I think easily you got to be in the probably 6 to 10 dozen.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, that's being generous. I think it's more like 10 to 20. It's a shotgun approach.
Absolutely. Yep.
Alrighty, for the next question. So someone asked, does a post-grad from a tech work background have a leg up and leverage to get into publishing research?
Repeat that again. Post back.
So would a post-grad from a tech work background have a leg up and leverage to get into publishing research? So whether or not postgraduate degrees in tech or any other background, are there any that would give you a leverage?
Oh, I mean, a postgraduate means they've already done a PhD.
No,
So
but
yeah.
like I think that this person has like a bachelor's or a master's. Yeah, I think if you have worked in tech or have like some sort of skills like a bachelor's or a master, like I could tell you like bioinformatics is a huge area now, and most of the people that have PhDs in biochemistry and those things are not really computer savvy or are learning computers. So I think like yeah, I think and I think that's also like leveraging your skills and leveraging your resume into being involved in doing that. And people
Yeah.
will love to have people that have experience.
Alrighty, so now this question. So what skills should I start building now regarding beginning research, coding, statistics, reading papers, writing, so I'm useful in a lab?
Um, I mean, those are probably just all things if you're already doing them anyway. I wouldn't I mean they're all going to come useful. So, I would you could probably figure a lot of it out, but I wouldn't wait until you're, you know, trained and fluent and all that before you start knocking on some doors.
Yeah, I think, but also like learning what kind of lab you're in. Like, there's labs that use R. Yeah, having to know how to use R is a great thing, but what if they don't have that? So I think like it's kind of like you don't know. First of all, you don't know what you need to know, and second, you don't know what they use. And so I think the whole part of being malleable and teachable, I think it's a really big, and I think the famous quote that they say in res it's you see one, you do one, and you teach one. And so um yeah, and I think all of those skills are important, but also what your like interests are and what you think that because you can't predict what other research and projects do. That's just my thing. You can't cover all your bases.
Alrighty, so on the same vein, someone asks, what level of statistics or methods background do you expect from students who join a project?
Um, I think I mean, I think that's just kind of like worrying too much, you know. You could probably just figure it out. I mean, the more statistics you know and you're comfortable with, it does make your life easier.
I know for me personally, I think the research I did required just at least like one basic research or statistics class, excuse me. But I was able to learn R and SPSS while on the project, so I didn't need to have those ahead of time. So I don't know if they necessarily expect that from me. So at least some, maybe a little bit of statistics, but
Yeah, there are actually some medical schools that require you to have at least one quarter or one semester of statistics. And I think that's like a really good class to have. And if you take that, but it's also like you got to use it. You can't just take the class and get an A and say, okay, I'm done. Like you gotta go through with it. And statistics, there's like with computers and things. Again, you don't need to have a PhD in statistics to do well in research. Most people don't, but you need to understand it.
for the next question, can you walk through an example of a simple but successful student-led project from idea to its design?
I think that's just very idealistic. Just let's just the better question is, how do you join a research, group or lab where you are? Like I mentioned, you're going to have to do a little bit of legwork, see what field interests you, contact these people. And if you do get an interview, make sure you read up and research what it is they're doing and then just be ready. A lot of first, second, third years, they're not going to be ready to have their own independent project in a stranger's lab. That's extremely unusual. I wouldn't just it's too theoretical a question. It's almost like saying like, how can I go inhabit this island that's uninhabited and have a sprawling city with 10,000 people in the next 7 years? It's a bit of a, fantasy question.
All right, the next question is, you mentioned being opportunistic. How do you take a research opportunity that might not be in your ideal field and still connect it meaningfully to your long-term interest and personal story for medical school?
Well, like I said, beggars can't be choosers. It's not like you're going to have 30 or 40 unique independent projects and you're worrying about, like transforming it to your story. I mean, if you are in that situation where you do have a fully done project, I mean, you don't necessarily have to spin it into your story. You just have to explain why you ended up in that lab. I mean, if it's something completely unrelated, like, I don't know, coming up with a new alloy for, some part of a rocket engine, I mean, yeah, it's probably pretty foreign. So, but again, I mean, it still taught you something. I don't think it's, detrimental to your application.
Alrighty, and then the next question is, how do you recommend balancing research with classes, volunteering, and clinical experience?
My bias has always been a little bit more toward research things because, yeah, they do require a lot of volunteering time, but honestly, it doesn't like really teach you anything. It's just sort of this like mandatory thing, and it's just meant to make sure that, you know what it's like to be in a clinic setting, so you don't think it's some extension of your biology class or something. But I mean, it doesn't. I think if you did volunteering, I mean, yeah, you're going to volunteer in a lot of hospitals, but I think volunteering for a nonprofit, even doing something educational, like maybe running a tutoring center, that probably can teach you a lot more. I think if you volunteered your time, like teaching kids science and math, that'll probably genuinely help you than, like waiting in a lobby for 4 hours doing nothing in a, like in a recovery suite. I mean, that's just a reality. Yes, you do have to do that to familiarize yourself. Maybe you can use it to make contacts. But if you're volunteering at a community hospital, there's no academic affiliation there. You're just sort of logging hours for the sake of it. Yes, you will sort of get the credit, right? It's one less thing you have to worry about. But if you went and taught chemistry at a high school for free, well, I mean, that's just probably going to help you on your MCAT indirectly. So kind of thinking about the quality. Now, coming back to balancing it, that's a judgment call you'll have to make. No one is going to sort of create free time for you.
Yeah, I could just tell you, like I work as a ER tech, and there's students that's been showing up for I don't know, like 6 months, 8 months, and it's kind of like saying, okay, that's really great. Like you get to see some pretty cool stuff, but like at some point, like the department will function without you showing up and giving a blanket to a patient. But I think like, if you would spend that time in after school program, certainly like in Oakland, like where I am, it's you could have a lot more benefit. And also I think it's a better human experience than showing up to the ER and watching us all work because we can't like the problem in healthcare is like very regulated, so you can't show up to the ER. We're not going to let you crack someone's chest. That's just not going to happen. Uh, they'll shut us down. But at the end of the day, like there's a lot of opportunities out there that you could make it happen, and I think you learn a lot more as yourself, but also you know and who you are more than anything. That's just my personal opinion. So take it, with a grain of salt. Or
Yep, I agree.
Michael, I have a question. So you know, if you could go back in time and your first year at community college at LA Valley, what advice would you give yourself, and what would you do differently?
Um, while my grades were, pretty good, sometimes I would focus a little bit too much on understanding the comment and maybe adapting to that specific professor's testing style. And I'm not indirectly saying that, just care about the grades more than the content, but make sure that you don't get too focused on the content at the expense of maybe the test taking that you do need to master for that specific class. So if you actually know the level at an A plus content, but maybe you don't strategize properly and you get an A minus or something or a B plus, while it may sound silly, but I think keeping in mind, it's a bit like making sure it's like perfecting your luggage and realizing you're going to miss the ride to the airport, you're going to miss your flight. So sort of the basic logistics of like, how does this professor test and what do I need to know that's unique besides actually knowing the content? And because you're going to be in a variety of settings and knowing how to navigate that specific teacher's class is actually important. Because keeping that in mind across every class you take, if on even if out of four classes out of your entire undergraduate career, it can make the difference between an A minus and an A plus. I mean, those little points add up on your GPA. So, and someone could argue, well, what is there a difference between a 3.7 and a 3.8? I mean, yeah, it kind of is. Those little point one increments really do add up. So that would be one thing. And I would definitely use that same logic for the MCAT. It is, there's probably countless podcasts on that, but I would really, really not underestimate that test. Now, if you take an early exam and you realize you probably have a knack for it and you're going to be good with a comfortable margin, then yeah, you don't have to worry. You're probably just going to do very well. But, if you're doing a little bit below average, you want to give yourself some time to familiarize yourself with those types of questions. So I would say early MCAT prep and sort of bring that same attitude to every specific class, meaning don't make a small logistical mistake or strategy mistake that can cost you a few points per class.
I think there are no more questions. I think that will be all.
Darcy, do you have any questions?
I have one last question for Dr. Sarkisian. Um, for example, like a candidate who doesn't have an research experience, how do you distinguish them with someone who has a lot of research experience? Do you think research is a really important fact for medical school application? And how do you think like it's important for medical schools?
You mean for the admissions committees, how they look at it?
Yes.
it's like everything else, like what shows that someone did more work. If someone has a master's degree, then yeah, they did more work than someone with a bachelor's. If someone went to a very good Ivy League school, versus sort of a lower tier public school, yeah, I mean the Ivy League kid is going to get more attention. If someone has, 12 poster presentations versus zero, yeah, they're just going to get more attention. So I think one way to look at it, I do think there's sort of this attitude, and I've seen this from deans that give, advice to pre-meds. They always sort of try to dampen the situation and make it seem like it's not as bad as it is or as competitive as it is. That might just be a PR stunt on their end. Maybe they want to calm down the room. But sadly, it is very competitive, and every advantage you can get, not necessarily from a competition perspective, but just for sort of you being able to show them your portfolio, look at my skill set, as in you don't have 6 or 7 publications to show off. It just shows that, hey, I actually put in hundreds of hours of work in these projects and I was able to go to these different conferences and present. It shows that you're willing to do the legwork. If you have a master's degree, it shows that you're willing to continue studying and put up with more school. If you go to a good school and you have good grades, that means you really took the classes seriously. You're probably smart enough. You do teaching on the side. I mean, all of these things are just strengthening, you as sort of this ideal candidate for medical school.
Thank
And
you.
yes, there is this sort of weird conversation that goes on that, research doesn't matter. I mean, I don't know where people come up with that. I mean, as you're showing them your portfolio and you're showing them your capabilities, I don't think anyone would say, I don't care about that. So,
Yeah, research is important, and I think we had a dean that did a talk about that, and I'll put that in there why it's important and why how admissions look at it. But I would just say that it's kind of like putting together a soccer team. Like not everyone's going to be able to be the goalie. There's only one person that's going to be a goalie and have those skill sets. Maybe they're taller, maybe they're could expand. They have good hand-eye coordination, and then you have somebody that's really good at dribbling, so they're going to put him in the middle. You have somebody who's a good defender. So I think it's like how do you develop your skills that you could you enjoy and you're good at and kind of maximize those and put and be on a soccer team. Because I mean, even in medicine, some doctors really like the stress of being in the ER, and some of them like to be psychiatrists and listen to people, and vice versa. I can't do either. Like you put an ER doctor in a psychiatric office, they will like start, you know, pulling their hair out because that's just not their personality. So I think, or their skill set, So, um, yeah, and some people are really good at research and really enjoy it, and some people don't. You just have to do a little bit of it. You have to be, and you have to do a little bit of everything, but then master at one or two things because you
yep.
can't do it all. Like it's just not. There's not enough hours in a day. Well, Dr. Sarkisian, we're at 1:30, and we don't want to keep you much longer because then your children would be mad at us for taking you away from them today. So,
No problem.
and you're home, and so thank you for making time today for us,
No, it's an honor to be invited. So hopefully the advice was useful.
and thank the kids for giving up their dad for an hour and a half on a Saturday. So, appreciate.
No problem. So hopefully people find this useful.
Thank you again,
Okay.
and have a great weekend.
Okay. Bye bye.